Okay, we're going to take a brief look at Lincoln's War, a new game that's just been produced by Multiman Publishing, and the designer is John Poniske. Now this game has just come out. It was a Kickstarter project that I supported. I'm very glad to have this copy. Now this game will be hitting the stores very soon, so it's one you certainly might want to consider. Now, Civil War gamers might already have Civil War, which came out in the 80s by Victory Games, and some of you may also own For the People, produced by Mark Herman and GMT, originally done by Avalon Hill. Now, I think it's inevitable that people will want to know the differences between the three. Now, this is not going to be a review about all three games. We are going to concentrate on Lincoln's War. I just will say from the outset that, and again, this is just my opinion, I think the finest game militarily, if you want just the military aspects of the Civil War, are this original Victory Games Civil War. It's strictly the military aspects. It's out of print now, getting kind of rare, and still a very fine game. But the comparisons really have to be more between these two, because For the People was the first card-driven game of the American Civil War, and a fine game it is. It's been reprinted several times. It's currently out of print. I think it's on the P500, and it's a major tournament at WBC. So this is still, for many people, the definitive Civil War game. So the new kid on the block is Lincoln's War, and people are probably going to be wondering, what's the difference between the two? Well, we're going to leave For the People for the moment, and let's take a look at the components to Lincoln's War, and occasionally I'll make references to For the People. But the video, we're going to try to concentrate on Lincoln's War. Okay, I've got a couple of nitpicks. The first one is directed against Multiman itself, I guess, and it has to do with the thickness of the box. Publishers, I wish you'd take into account that the fact that we have to put these games away. So the box could be thicker. The reason being that you can't get all the pieces back in the box very easily if you want to put them away nicely. Now, I don't know about other people, but I like to put my cards in these plastic cases, and I like to sort my counters efficiently. Now the GMT standard trays will fit in the box, no problem there. But if you do put the GMT trays in, you're going to have a hard time getting your cards in, especially if you want to store them in boxes. So I had to resort to this smaller flat trays, which I bought at Michael's, put them in there, and now I can get the cards and the charts and all the rules in there. That will fit in. But you'll have trouble if you're using the GMT trays. So that's my little nitpick against the physical box. It should be higher. The other nitpick has to do with the setup, but we'll get to that later. Let's just take a look at some of the components first. Okay, we'll do just an overview of the components first, and we'll zoom in on them, and you'll be able to get a better look at them. You've got the map sheet, of course, and you get two Lincoln's War player aids, both the same, one for each player. You get a nice shiny rules booklet and the playbook, and two sets of cards. There's going to be a dedicated Confederate deck and a dedicated US deck, and I've separated these cards for a reason. We'll take a look at those in a moment. So component wise, it's a very nice looking game. The pieces are quite nice too. We'll be zooming in on those in an appropriate section in the video, but component-wise, these are really nice, especially the cards, and we'll have to do a zoom-in view of those. Okay, here's a look, closer look at the Congressional support cards. You can see that they're numbered from 0 to 5. These are the Confederate ones with the picture of Jeff Davis, and these are the Union ones with a picture of Lincoln, numbered 0 to 5. Also shown is the Confederate 0 resource card and the Union resource card. Again, these are not folded into the deck. They remain at the side of the board, available to each player. Now these are the campaign cards, and again, these are set aside. These are the Confederate ones here and the Union ones. They're identical, and they're geographic specific. In other words, this one means you can have a campaign in the Trans-Mississippi, this one means you can have a campaign in the Eastern Theater. Now John's method of using the campaign cards is quite different than other CGG games I've seen. That's kind of neat. These cards are set aside, and you can voluntarily pick one or two, if you want, at the expense of the size of your card hand, which is going to change every turn. For example, on turn 1, the Union and Confederate each get 6 cards. or if you wanted to pick one of these campaign cards, you can do so and draw only 5 cards. So these campaign cards are set aside and they're always available to each player. Quite different than other games you've seen where campaign cards are often folded into the main deck. Okay, well, we're not going to go through a whole game or anything like that. Okay, that would take hours. And so we're going to show you the setup. That's the setup for the campaign game. And we're going to zoom in and give you a little bit idea of what the map is all about. Let's start in the east. Okay, we're just looking at the kind of the cockpit of the Civil War, the Eastern Theater. And of course there's Washington, and there's Richmond. That's Lynchburg, Virginia, and Spartansburg. And for those of you who know Civil War history, you must realize that a lot of the Civil War battles were fought in this little 3-hex area here. You had Manassas Junction there, 2 battles of Bull Run were fought there. Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville, the Wilderness were all fought here, plus the Shenandoah Valleys. There were several campaigns in there. And you can see that the scale here is very broad brush. Each hexagon in this scale represents about 110 miles, I think John said. So it's very broad brush. But I can assure you that there's lots of, even though it's broad brush, there's lots of activity that can occur in these areas. Let's take a look at the Midwest. Alright, there's Kentucky, Lexington and Louisville. And that's Cincinnati. Up here we've got Columbus, Indianapolis. And I'll get to that. That's an errata for McDowell's setup. Kentucky has special rules, of course. It was neutral in the Civil War. It could have gone with the Confederacy or gone with the Union. So there's special rules for the state of Kentucky. And we'll move over to the St. Louis region and parts of Missouri. That's St. Louis there. And there's Springfield, Missouri. And up here is Kansas City. We'll go down the Mississippi a little bit. Of course, you've got Memphis and your Vicksburg, and at the bottom end, of course, you've got New Orleans, which is very important, and the coast of Florida, and we'll go up the coast slowly. Savannah, Charleston, Wilmington, Beaufort, North Carolina, Fortress Monroe, and back to the east. So it's a broad brush look at the Civil War. Only the major cities are shown, but as we'll see when I comment on play, it simulates the grand strategic aspects of the Civil War very well. Okay, there's an errata for the setup of McDowell. He does not set up here at Indiana, hex 0903. It's actually 1903. So McDowell in your strategic setup sets up here at Washington. The other errata that Michelle pointed out to me is this Hinks unit. If you read the setup rules, it says that Hinks sets up at hex 1903, which is Washington, but I've been told that he actually comes in through a card event or some other mechanism, so Hinks does not start the game there. Just 2 minor bits of errata. Now, I'm going to mention at this point, since we just happen to be looking at that area of the board, my little nitpick about the historical setup, and this would be a philosophical difference with the designer. It has to do with the location of the Confederate Army. Now, on turn 1, the Union does have the initiative, so the Union will be moving first. My little nitpick is the location of the Confederate Army. I mean, we know that it was actually located up here at Manassas Junction. Joseph E. Johnson was there, and Jackson and the boys were here in the valley. And as we know historically, Jackson reinforced Manassas Junction. Eventually the first Battle of Bull Run was fought there. But the game sets up differently. Johnson is actually at Richmond, and my concern is that the path to Richmond is open. Now, I've since been told that a major army crossing a river, in this case the Potomac, would not be able to attack Richmond on turn 1. But you could have a corps attack it, which I'm a little uncomfortable with, because that represents a corps moving 110 miles and attacking Richmond, which really was not possible for the opening moves of the war. I really question the setup. I wish that the Confederate Army had set up here at 1804. Now, I'm not saying that Richmond can be captured on turn 1. Because of other game rules, there are lots of variables, and it's just a little historical nitpick. I would have preferred to see the Confederate Army here at 1804. But when I asked one of the developers about it, he said that they wanted to have all units set up at cities. But again, that's just quite minor. It doesn't affect the game, as you'll see, although it could. So other than that, that's my only little nitpick. But let's take a look at the generals and what the numbers mean. Okay, we'll just take a look at 2 random generals, Van Dorn here at Chattanooga and Ewell at Atlanta. Now the number on the left is the number we've been used to in other CGG games about activating the general. So Ewell or Van Dorn would activate on a card of 1 or 2 or 3. The top number here represents their ability in attack, in this case Van Dorn's 2, as is Ewell. The number on the bottom represents the defense. Van Dorn, defense of 1, Ewell, defense of 2. And the number of stars on the general is important for rank. It also shows the size of his forces. And generals come in 3 different types, 1-star, 2, and 3-star. When you flip a general, a 1-star general, he becomes a 2-star general. Okay? And if you need to graduate, let's say Ewell to a 3-star, you'll take this counter off and replace it with a 3-star general. So that's how the generals work. And of course we have the exact equivalent for the Union. McPherson, for example, takes 2 to activate, attack 1, defense 2. Stoneman, by the way, because he's in red, tells us that he's a cavalry general. So cavalry generals are in red and they have different abilities than infantry generals. Now the meat of the operations phase are these generals. One curiosity you might note is that there's no strength points on the board, and the designer has done a kind of a neat thing here. The strength points are actually integrated into the generals. So the generals and the rank indicate the size of the force. So this Sigel represents like a couple of brigades, a division. 2 stars represents a larger formation, perhaps a corps, and 3 represents kind of an army command. So the generals themselves are the strength points. And when we get to the combat, we'll make a few comments on that. It's a diceless combat system, and it's really cool. It's quite innovative, and we'll get to that in a moment. Okay, a comment on some of the cities. For example, Tallahassee here. The number to the left is its defense strength inherent, and the number to the right is its supply capacity. And if I'm pronouncing this right, Apalachicola, Florida, same thing, defense of 1 and supply of 1. Other cities are different. For example, Vicksburg there has a defense of 4 and a supply of 3. So that's what those numbers mean on the board. Okay, associated with port cities are these little wee blue triangles, and those indicate the number of Union fleets that would be required to totally blockade the port. In this case, Charleston would require 3 Union fleets. In the case of Savannah, it would require 2, because you have 2 little wee blue triangles here. Now if we go down to Galveston and Sabine City, you can see that there's only 1. It would take 1 single Union fleet to blockade those. Now the naval stuff is kind of cool. There's a whole naval sub-war system going on here. The Confederates can produce raiders, and they can be put on these tracks to raid Union shipping. And the Union can counter by sending fleets to try and sink these raiders. And we'll show you a couple of those counters. Okay, for example, the Confederate player may have produced the raider Sumter, and in the appropriate naval phase he'd move the Sumter raider to the raid box. He'd roll a die and see if he affects the Union's CSP value, which we'll mention later. Later on, let's say the Union moved a fleet in here, he could attempt to try and destroy this raider by rolling a die. So there's a whole little wee sub-naval combat system going on here, which is related to the blockade. Does the Union player use his resources to blockade the South, or does he use them to track down raiders, or some combination of both? So the naval system is simple, but it's really cool. It's well thought out, and I think it works very well. Okay, I'm going to show the political tracks, political currency tracks, and the Congressional support point tracks. Now they're both identical. The Union have their track and the Confederates have their own. But for the sake of the video, I'll just show the Confederate track for now. So the meat of the game is this political currency. And on this track, you're going to be tracking the amount of political currency points you have. The Confederate starts with 15. There's your 10. And your 15. And then totally separate is this Congressional support points, which is this CSP marker. Now they are related, but they are different. Now in essence, you're trying to get your opponent's political currency to 0. You're also trying to get his Congressional support points to 0. And when you do that, when both are at 0, in the appropriate phase, you have the chance of winning the game, essentially collapsing the opponent's government. So that's your overall objective in the game. And victory points too at the end of the game if you're going to play out the whole thing. So political currency and Congressional support points are very, very important. And you can play cards in the game. For example, let's say the Confederate played this Samuel Cooper card and he decided to play it for political points. He could add 4 political points to his track. He would just move the political marker up 4. So that's the way cards are used in the game. You can play them for the political point value, to move forces, move the political currency, or play it for the event, like many other card-driven games. That's in essence how the cards work, but they do other things too, and we'll get to that soon. Okay, one important thing about the political currency and the Congressional support points is the difference in how they work. Now, as I showed you, the cards can be used to increase your political currency, but the Congressional support points can only be bought at the expense of political currency. So in the administration phase, let's say the Confederate wanted to buy 5 Congressional support points. Well, he would just pay 5 PCs. So he'd move the CSP to 5, but he'd drop the PC marker by 5, taking this off down to, so you just have 10. So they equate 1 to 1. If you want to buy 5 CSP, it costs you 5 PC. And the maximum you can buy for CSP, Congressional support points, is 9. That's absolute. Now, Congressional support points are going to become important for battles. That's why you buy them, because it's the support of Congress that's going to help modify your battle. And again, as you fight battles, you'll be burning up these CSPs, and at the end of a turn, these always zero to the base. You always have to kind of repurchase them every turn. And you'll want to buy some. I don't think there's going to be too many turns when you don't want to buy any. So that is a whole subsystem of the game. Very neat part of the game. You could almost say that the meat of the game is here. That the forces moving on the board modify the PC values. So it's a means to an end kind of thing. PC, political currency, and Congressional support points, very important in the game. Now it's a diceless combat system, and I'll try to explain generally how it works. It works pretty neat, but it's the playing of it you'll really see the nuances of the game. For example, let's say McPherson in this case was activated and he decided to attack Van Dorn. Now the base value would be McPherson's attack value, which is 1, and Van Dorn's base, which is 1 for defense, so you have a net difference of 0. But by spending Congressional support points, the Union player could play some of these resource cards, and these resource cards would be hidden. So he would play, let's say, for the sake of example, 4. He would hide this card, and the Confederate player would pay Congressional support points and play one of his cards. Let's say, for the sake of argument, the Confederate selected a 3 and the Union selected a 4. So that would give a net difference of +1. And in this case, a +1 means, I think it's a skirmish. I'll just check the chart. Actually, a +1 equates to a standoff, which in this case says the defeat, no clear winner, combat strengths revealed, attacker withdraws. Draw a card for a general casualty. There's a chance that a general might be killed. For the victor, no clear winner, combat strength revealed, attacker withdraws, draw a card for general casualty. So there we have a little bit inconclusive battle. Now you can also get the minor victory, which causes all kinds of things, and 5 or more major victory, which causes even more trouble. And I'll show how these immobilization tokens work. They're kind of neat. Okay, let's say for the sake of argument that had been a greater victory. The Confederate player might have had 3 immobilization tokens placed on him. Now one thing I like about this game is that armies aren't destroyed outright. Civil War armies just weren't destroyed in the war unless they were forced to surrender, like at Vicksburg. So this game, you immobilize your enemy by throwing these points on them, and they're all in various denominations. So if you get a 10 immobilization token put on you, you're going to be pretty immobilized. And what that means is that you'd be actually kind of like -3 to your next combat. So you're going to want to get to remove these immobilization tokens off your army as fast as you can. And you do that by playing your cards. So as you immobilize the enemy, you're causing him to burn more cards to kind of rally his armies. Now there's a lot more to the combat than I've shown, but in essence that's generally how it works. Now the defenses of cities are going to make a difference, whether you're attacking across a river. There are battle cards, and I'll show you one of those. Okay, there's an example of a battle card, and they're distinguished by having a green ribbon and a stamp placed on it. Now this particular one, Jedediah Hotchkiss, indicates strong entrenchments, increase the defense of a CS force in a battle by 2, disregard 1 immobilization token inflicted by this combat, immediately replace when used as a resource. So when you use these battle cards, you get to replace 1 card in your hand. So these cards are very valuable. But that's what a battle card looks like. Watch for the green ribbon and the stamp. Now when the combat result calls for a general casualty, you draw a card from your own deck and take a look at the bottom of the card. And if the bottom of the card does not have a star, you're okay. No general was potentially wounded. But if you draw a card and it does have one of these little stars on here, you have a chance that one of your generals, the commanding general, was killed. Then you roll on a special little table here to see whether he's wounded or killed. So the general casualty system is pretty neat. I like the way it works. Now there's way more to this game than I could possibly show in an introductory video. But the markers give you hints as to some of the kind of rules and events that are covered in the game. For example, cavalry can raid cities, set them on fire. You can get generals that are reluctant to follow orders. Rail lines can be temporarily interdicted, causing supply problems. As forces capture cities, you can leave garrisons in them. There's the Emancipation Proclamation, which can be effected in the game. You also have British intervention, which may come in. You've got optional rules for generals that are political poison. They may be independent-minded. These are all optional rules. There's just way more to this game than I can possibly show in a short video. You've also got temporary commanding officers when generals are wounded. There's a whole promotion system. You've got port city staging, which is important when you capture a coastal city and then you want to move inland. There's a heck of a lot to this game, but I want to wrap up the video now and just give you a little bit of a summation. Before wrapping up, I guess I should say another thing about the cards. They're just absolutely beautiful. They're state-of-the-art. They're really nice looking cards with the historical photograph, the information, the background. They're just beautiful. I should point out some of these seditious characters. They're kind of neat. You can notice that they've got a -3, so you don't want to have one of these guys in your hand. John is really trying to show the political stuff that's going on in the background, and these guys can be bad news in your hand, because you're going to have to minus your political currency when you get one of these in your hand. And there are special rules to get rid of them when you have several in your hand. Peculiar General card, Raphael Semmes, Zebulon Vance. The whole, all the decks are nearly all the personalities you've ever read about in the Civil War. They've done a very good job on capturing the flavor of the Civil War with the personages. And of course the Union has the same deck. So I can't say enough good things about these cards. They're just absolutely fabulous. Well, in summary, I have to say that this is a very good game. I've only got really 2 games under my belt right now, and I'm very favorably disposed to this game. I'm loath to give a rating on games because my videos are usually just introductions to them. It's not fair to rate a game when you've only played it a couple of times. Many games you have to play a while to really see all the nuances of it. But for this one, you know, I'm going to give a number because I've only played it once or twice, but I'm off the cuff, I'm kind of thinking it's like a 7 for me out of 10. It's a very good game. Now, again, with reference to the old Civil War game by Victory Games, I think that's the best one for the strict military simulation of the Civil War. And of course, as I mentioned again, for many people, For the People is going to be their favorite Civil War game. But for me, I don't know. It's very early to tell. But for me, Lincoln's War might be the Civil War game that I play more often than the other ones. And not because it's necessarily the best game of them, but it's just kind of, I don't know, maybe more playable. Just something about it that really captures the spirit of the Civil War. Victory Games Civil War is a very detailed and complicated game, very long. And even For the People sometimes takes a long time. And some of the play in For the People that some of the veterans have figured out are kind of a little ahistorical. So for me, maybe Lincoln's War is going to be the standard, the Civil War game that I play more often. And you might find this too. So that's my summation of Lincoln's War. It's just come out from MMP, and I think for you Civil War aficionados, you'd like it. And that's it. Thanks for watching.